Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday and happy Juneteenth month. I am so happy that you all are joining me for today's discussion. Whether you are going to be streaming this live or you will be watching the replay, I'm so happy to have you. Um, I'm very, very excited about why I am conversing with you today. And I hope that you find some value in today's conversation. I, you guys, it took me a long time to finish reading Cicely Tyson's Just As I Am. And I'll explain why. Really, just because I am often very busy with several tasks. And so sometimes it takes me a minute to get through things. And leisure reading in particular is one of those things that sometimes takes some time for me, depending on what else is going on. This book was so good. And if you are familiar with my reading experience, you know that I write in the margins, I highlight, I take notes while I'm reading a book. If I see something that's interesting or that I feel leads to another question in my mind, then I will pause, put a pin in it, go do research, come back and connect the dots. So, reading for me is not just a normal reading experience. A lot of times, it's ultimately a research experience that I do just because that's how I really dig into the content that I'm studying. So this book was no different. As a matter of fact, I felt that what Miss Tyson did in this book was so expansive, was so deep, was so long, was so filled with wisdom that I really did find it very hard to just choose five key points to discuss. And I kind of contemplated whether or not I needed to like turn this into a 2 or 3 part series for the discussion. I'm so serious. Like it was just that difficult for me to like say, dang, what do I need to do? So, and I'm just sharing the conversation. Um, but I did decide ultimately that I was going to do just one discussion for this because I do have a couple of other conversations lined up for this month. But in some of the future readings, we will probably be splitting those up into a couple of different conversations. And I will even try to share some information about the books with you ahead of time, just in case they are books you've already read or books you're interested in reading. I know a lot of book clubs have already read Just As I Am, so I was a little bit behind on that. But I got to it, when I could. I have been a huge fan of Cicely Tyson since I was a little girl. No, like seriously. And I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger and then we'll make the PowerPoint large in a minute. I have been a huge fan of Cicely Tyson for a very long time. The first movie I saw with her in it was actually Sounder when I was a little girl. And then the second one I saw with her in it would have to probably be, well, I couldn't even name it because she was in so many movies in the 80s. But I would say another role that impacted me greatly was the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman. And you guys are about to laugh, but I am not playing. You can ask people from my church. Now, I do not agree, but they used to say that I looked like Cicely Tyson. And Miss Bradford, one of my church leaders, used to actually call me Cicely Tyson all the time, y'all. It was so funny. And so it used to really, really like, make me feel like I was something special because I really loved Cicely Tyson so much. But I did not actually believe I looked anything like her because I've always thought she was such a beautiful and marvelous woman and so breathtaking and eloquent. And I believe that in this book, that's kind of one of the things that we get to see as well is um, who she was behind the scene, who she was through and through, what her flaws were, what her life was really like. So I hope that what I share with you will be insightful, and that you will also take these conversations with you as you go other places. So I have the y'all. That's what else I'm excited about. Well, let me see. How do I do this? Okay. So, baby, check. Look at this. Your girl has the PowerPoint on the screen. And for some people, that might be like, girl, that is not a big deal. But as a person that is continuously learning how to improve my skills with technology, especially with StreamYard, I was very, very excited because I was like, am I going to definitely know what I'm doing when I get ready to do this? So I'm very excited to be able to put the PowerPoint up on the screen for you all to see so we can talk about it. You're going to see me also looking at the PowerPoint here in print because, honey, the eyes are not always giving what they're supposed to be giving, okay? And then you will also see me actually read some excerpts directly from the book as well, just because I think there are such important components that are not done justice just by talking about them, but by actually looking at those notes. And of course, you guys are always welcome to drop your comments and to ask questions, and I'll do the best I can to answer them. And of course, if I can't give you the answer off the top of my head, I'll look it up. There was so much packed into this book. I will be honest with you guys. If I don't know something, it's really just because I don't remember. Because there were so many great nuggets that Cicely Tyson shared with us. So I'm not going to delay. I'm going to go ahead and get started. I want to try to keep this conversation down to about 45 minutes. If you're already here in the room, please go ahead and hit that share button, tag some of your friends, text this to some of your friends, tell them to tune in, check out the conversation. I'm going to be talking about Cicely Tyson's autobiography, just as I am. And I also thought it was really important that we start off talking about this book. It kind of just fell in with Juneteenth month. But I think that it's important, it's symbolically important that it falls in with Juneteenth month because Miss Tyson just passed, I think it was last year, that she passed away. And she was nearly 100 years old. And so I think that it was really important that we have that conversation now because, yeah, January 28th, 2021. So it's been right at a year and a half since she passed away. And I don't know about you all, but I really thought that that kind of caught me off guard. And even though I marveled at the fact that we had so long here with her and how amazing she was and how thankful we were to have her here, I was still rather sad that she passed away because I don't think I was prepared for it. I think that's what it came down to, that I just wasn't prepared for her to pass away because she seemed to be in such good health and thriving and making all these great moves. And I thought we might even see one more acting role out of her, right? But legends have to pass on. Legends have to go to the next realm of life in order to make room for the next group of actors and actresses to come through. So she did pass away just last year. And I think that that's why it's important as well that we talk about her during this Juneteenth season. So I want to start off with the first slide where I just chose two of my favorite pictures from this book. I do want to say that the picture she had on the cover, I had seen that picture before, and it was one of my favorite photos of her because I believe that it just shows you how incredibly beautiful Cicely Tyson was, how refined who she was. She has on like this minimal amount of makeup and this minimal amount of jewelry, but she is absolutely gorgeous. The second one, in the antebellum dress that she had made, I believe that that was the dress that she had made for when she was recognized for her work in Sounder. I believe is when she had the dress made, and I don't know. I think it's interesting because I've still been trying to unpack exactly why that dress appeals to me so much. And I think that the thing for me is that Number one is made to kind of look like it's out of those potato sacks that black women used to have to pick out of the fields with. And it shows um, historic black fashion and how black women, all even in the midst of pain, the beauty, the elegance, the sophistication of black women, and how it only took just the bare minimum, right? This sack dress to make her look like royalty. And I also thought it was just rather wonderful of her to do it and to wear this dress and have this dress made as a tribute to our ancestors. So I absolutely love that. I thought that dress was absolutely gorgeous. It's one of my favorite pictures of Cicely Tyson. Um, and I thought it was amazing. So let's go ahead and get into our conversation. So one of my favorite parts about this book was discussing Cicely and the Black arts community. And there were a few reasons that I absolutely enjoyed this. Number one, I feel that we hear about like Mr. James Earl Jones and Sidney Poitier, who was passed away, bless his heart. We hear about Diane Carroll. We hear about these people from the perspective of individually, if that makes sense. But we don't often hear about them from a collective standpoint as a group, and kind of how they made these significant strides in Hollywood together as a group. In Just As I Am, Cicely Tyson, for me, really introduced us to these actors as a group, who were part of this performance troupe, who were very significant in this play written by this French writer called The Blacks, and how some of the most well-known actors and actresses of history played such a significant role in The Blacks, and that would end up being a gateway to many of them going to mainstream Hollywood. One of the other things that she also discussed in here was the fact that they all like hung together. They had this sense of camaraderie. She even made mention of the relationship between Diane Carroll and Sidney Poitier, which is something we hear a little bit about. And then if there's a documentary that talks a little bit about it, but even hearing Cicely Tyson kind of talk about it as an outside friend, to me brought this even more so to life. So what I enjoyed when she described the personality of James Earl Jones, how loud and boisterous and courageous he appears to be on stage, but how very meek and mild he was behind the scenes in person. I enjoyed that. When she talked about working with Billy D. Williams and what that experience was like, I felt like all of this really brought to us a sense of Black community in the acting, in the Black arts community during that time that we don't always hear about from a collective perspective. Uh, I, we always talk about the Harlem Renaissance, right? The Harlem Renaissance is always in textbooks. We'll hear about Langston Hughes and all the other greats, Claude McKay, and all the other great poets, Josephine Baker, and artists and actresses that existed during that Harlem Renaissance time. But we hardly ever really hear a discussion about the group of people who came after that period. And that's kind of what Cicely Tyson opens us up to in this discussion. And I feel like that was so important because after that group, I feel like that's when we entered the Black exploitation period, where you had some of the same actors and actresses. They had gotten older, they were more mature, they were more established. Some of them participated. Cicely was one who didn't, but into that Black exploitation period, and then you had the 80s, which to me was the rise of like black fame and royalty and black respect in theater, and then the 90s. So for me, what Cicely Tyson did in talking about the black arts community during her era was filling a missing gap that I have been trying to figure out for a long time. So I really, 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 really enjoyed that. And she talked very heavily about how important the stage play The Blacks was to all of them and the kind of doors it opened. And so I'm going to even take a minute to talk about Dr. Maya Angelou, because I think there are so many things that people don't know about Dr. Maya Angelou, and that Cicely Tyson really made a significant impact on people understanding Dr. Maya Angelou past just being a poet. So I'm gonna read the points that I wrote here. Thriving Black arts movement post Harlem Renaissance, but pre-Black exploitation. That's the era that Cicely lived in. And then the thing that I also value about the group that Miss Tyson was in was that they had this long-standing allegiance to each other, even as time and cinema evolved. They still respected each other. They knew what they would be a part of and what they wouldn't. They had each other's back. It really didn't seem like they judged each other. Like it was genuinely an arts community of respect, and I think that is so important for us to see, because that period of time, as I said before, is often skipped over. And so this is one of the quotes. Here are one of the quotes from the book that I took that I really, really like. She said, just about every young active note was connected with the blacks. James Earl Jones, Roscoe Lee Brown, Lou Gossett Jr., Billy D. Williams, Charles Gordon, and Maya Angelou. And she even talked about how around this time, it was when she met Diane Carroll. And of course, I already said Sidney Poitier. And so many of the black actors and actresses that would go on to make some of the most significant breakthroughs in mainstream Hollywood. So these are a very historic group of people whose story is often told from an individualistic perspective, but not necessarily from a collective one. Even if we have seen them on these screens together, which we have seen them in movies like Sounder, we have seen them in movies like um, um, the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman. We have seen them in a lot of those different types of movies, but we have not necessarily heard their story from the backside, told from a collective perspective, um, performing artists and being in a community. And this is what I wanted to talk about. Dr. Maya Angelou. So this is what I wanted. First of all, before we began, you all already know that I'm a huge fan and have been all of my life. I've been a big fan of Dr. Maya Angelou. So when her name pops up instantly, we put a pin in the conversation, because you know how important she is to me. But the reason that I felt it was important to pause to talk about Dr. Maya Angelou in this component is because there are so many people who think that Dr. Maya Angelou is just this poet who popped up in the 80s, and Oprah liked her, and that's how she got all of her acclaim. When Dr. Maya Angelou had a long-standing reputation and work resume before she crossed paths with Oprah Winfrey. Now, did that impact her? Of course. Did speaking for President Bill Clinton impact her future? Most definitely. But prior to those experiences, the reason that Oprah and Bill Clinton were able to become familiar with her, or to acknowledge her, or to say we really, really want her, was because she had a long-standing resume of work already. And one of the things that Cicely Tyson mentioned in the book was that, first of all, Maya Angelou was in the play The Blacks. She was one of those early artists paving the way for actors and actresses that exist today. And a lot of us know, we've heard the play Calypso. I mean, we've heard Calypso. We've heard that she was a singer. But a lot of times I think people minimize it, thinking, oh, she just did one or two things, when she was actually a performer who worked as a performer full time. And she had a solid resume of work that she was doing. And these people knew her. Lou Gossett knew her. James Earl Jones knew her. Cicely Tyson knew her. They were all cool friends. And one of the things that Cicely Tyson shares in the book is that Maya Angelou would cook these dinners. So it made me think of, so she said she would cook these dinners and invite everybody over to eat and socialize and have fun. And she was just a host. She was a hostess. And it put me back into that Southern mindset again because, of course, that much of her childhood was spent in Arkansas, not very far from here. She spent a lot of her childhood in Stamps. Stamps is about an hour and a half from where I live. And that one of the things she talks about in Stamps is her grandmother. And the close relationship they had. So when I listened to when I read what Cicely Tyson was saying about how she would host these dinners and have everybody from the cast come over to eat all the time, and they would talk and laugh, and it would just be a very, very, wonderful environment. It took me back to that southern part of her, the southern component of her. And honestly, it then kind of took my mind over to 2022 Tabitha Brown, right? That woman of warmth and good energy and positivity. So it just kind of took my mind to connecting the dots to how Black women today are still present in these warming roles, right? And though for those of you who know me personally, you know that I love feeding people, I love cooking, I love having folks over to talk about old times and enjoy a good meal. So I loved that aspect of um, Dr. Maya Angelou. I think the other part that was important about this was that when I had the chance to go to so if you've ever been on my blog, which is powertothepen.wordpress.com, I talk about how shortly after Dr. Maya Angelou died, which was about 7 years ago now, I know it was about 7 years ago because I was pregnant with my son. And we drove up to Stamps, Arkansas, and we entered the town and we come to this road where there's a house sitting right there at the end, little old house, little shack house. I mean, it was cute, it was neat, but you could tell it had been there for some time. And these old women proceeded to tell us the stories about how Maya Angelou had come home and how she was seeing home copies of her book for people to read that she was still good friends with whenever she had a new book that was getting ready to come out. And so she told us about the time when she was writing one of her books, and Dr. Maya Angelou came home and they had a piano and they pulled the piano out. And I think she said Dr. Maya Angelou had cooked the greens and cooked cornbread. I mean, cooked up this big Southern meal and invited all the friends and stuff over. And she sat down and played the piano, and they were singing and laughing and enjoying themselves all night. And so to hear this account from Cicely Tyson that talks about how Dr. Maya Angelou did that within the arts community, and then to have personally heard a story in Stamps, Arkansas, just 7 years ago. Wow, brings things around full circle for you to know that that was genuinely and authentically the type of person that she was. So that component was very, very important for me in this story. The other part about it was that I think it was important as well for us to know how Cicely Tyson talks about the fact that Dr. Maya Angelou actually made her own decision to, I guess, in a sense, I guess you could say leave or take a hiatus from the Black arts community in order to go do social advocacy work. If you've read anything about her, you know that she worked with Dr. Martin Luther King as well as Malcolm X. As a matter of fact, she was living in Ghana when Malcolm X came to Ghana. And one of the interesting stories that Cicely Tyson shares is that when she really realized the full capacity of what was going on with the civil rights movement, she felt an urge to do something, and she contacted Dr. Maya Angelou about coming to do some work. And Dr. Maya Angelou told her, She just didn't know if that was the right thing for her to do. And I don't think it was to discourage her at all. I believe that we all have roles that we have to play. And sometimes our friends just have that wisdom to know exactly where our role belongs. And I think a lot of times when we see things that need to happen, sometimes we feel that we are obligated to also put our feet on the ground to prove that we are just as involved and engaged and committed as the next person. But sometimes your role in making the change is whatever you are already doing. Like that's the contribution. You are breaking those stigmas in some type of way. So I'm not going to dig too far into that because I honestly don't remember every single detail about that, and I don't want to misquote it. But I definitely recommend that you check out that part where she talks about how she felt so compelled to go do work for the civil rights movement, and she ended up having a conversation with Dr. Maya Angelou about it. And that this, I mean, because it was very hard work, and it was very dangerous work. I think that Dr. Maya Angelou felt a stronger compelling to do so because even though she lived in St. Louis, and we know a lot happened in St. Louis as well, she spent some of her childhood in St. Louis. She has spent a large portion, if not most of her childhood, in Arkansas. And so what was going on in the South was very real to her, very close to her. If you read the autobiographies or the stories of Dr. Maya Angelou, she talks about what went on in Stemps, Arkansas. When I went to Stemps, Arkansas, it was very interesting to envision, excuse me, what she talks about in regards to the community being split or separated by the train tracks. I actually saw those train tracks. So I get that. So I thought that that was really amazing. And I think that's one thing for sure people um may skim over in reading. But if you know Dr. Maya Angelou's story, or if you've had the chance to do deep exploration as I have, um, it's a very important part, very very important component of this book, and I really really thank Cicely Tyson for talking about that. So let's get on to my second part. I started to say, now let me tell you something. I started to save this for last. I started to save this for last because, honey, this relationship with Miles Davis was a mess. But to be honest with you, I wanted to get it out of the way because I feel that the cultural aspect of what Cicely Tyson was doing was so big and so important that I didn't want to take away from it. So I'm going to take some time to talk about the relationship she had with Miles Davis and what I believe about love. And I'll even talk briefly about her first marriage and I'll talk personally about how I felt like Cicely was so relatable too when it came to the romance perspective. Um, and then we'll go on from there. So when we talk about Cicely's romance, she spent many years in this on and off relationship with Miles Davis, despite his drug abuse, infidelity, and more than one threatening illness that he had, including right before he died, he had HIV and AIDS. It was really just by chance that Cicely was not involved in she was not involved with him, and therefore kind of just missed by chance, not being victimized as well. And I thought, wow, I know, I guess you could say that's a blessing. I guess going in and out. I'm so sorry. Hopefully it'll pick back up. Thank you, Andrea. Let me see. Hopefully it'll clear up some. Let me see. Is that better? So, so Miles Davis, of course, we know was very widely known as a saxophonist. I hope I'm not drawing a blank, but as a musician, let me say a musician. And I think that when she met him, it was instantly love, or at least infatuation that she felt with him. And I'm gonna tell y'all something. Now I'm not trying to be mean, but every time I looked at pictures of him, I'm like, Cicely Tyson was so gorgeous. And Miles, I'm not being, mean, but I know it was had to be the swag that turned her on to him. You know what I'm saying? The music, the charisma, the bad boy image, that had to be what turned her on to him because she was an absolute bombshell. And I know that there were a lot of men going after Cicely Tyson. And I'm not trying to be ugly in any way, but I'm just saying. But she spent a lot of years in and out of relationships with him. And Miles Davis did not treat Cicely Tyson very well at all. He cheated on her. As a matter of fact, he cheated on her once and ended up marrying Betty. I forgot her last name, but there was an artist, and Betty was a promising black female rock star during a time when rock stars were really like mostly men. She was one of those promising black female, or the most promising black female rock star. And so she was getting a lot of fame, and he was cheating on Cicely Tyson with her and ended up marrying her. They did not stay married very long. They broke up, and then Betty went off the scene. And it's what I found with him and Cicely. It was kind of like Cicely Tyson was always present. She was never just gone off the scene when it came to Miles Davis, but she was especially always there every time something went wrong with him. And it just reminds me of number one, how human Cicely Tyson was as a woman. Number two, how real she was as a woman. Because so many women have also been in these type of toxic relationships with men who don't fully commit, who don't, treat you the way you deserve to be treated, but you really, really love them and you stay with them and you stay there. And every time they call, you're the ride or die chick. You are the one that's always there. And so that's what her relationship with Miles reminded me of because, y'all, he would come, he would OD. There was the time when he got because toward the end, whenever they finally, right before they finally got married, Miles Davis had gotten extremely sick. She tells a story about how he was so sick that the doctor was expecting him to die, and she took him to a doctor, a foreign doctor, who gave him a set of remedies to follow in order to live. That doctor basically helped him get back to health, and he eventually got back on his feet. And you would believe that, like, after this near death experience, I don't care how many drugs you've done, after this near death experience, you would believe that, this will be the turnaround point for Miles Davis that, oh, you're going to finally do the right thing and treat Cicely the way she deserves to be treated. And they did get married in a small ceremony, but I mean, it was really only a matter of time before he was back to doing the same stuff, using drugs, sleeping around, even going so far as to bring a married woman, into her house consistently. And he had an ongoing affair with her. And we don't know if he ended up contracting AIDS and HIV through drug use or through intimacy, but even so, eventually, he was still holding on to Cicely, even then, and begged for her to take him back after he was sick, and even said to her, you know, we can be together, but we just don't have to be intimate. And she said that's when she knew that it was true. Because until then, it was just kind of like a rumor. She said, but when he told her, we can be together, we just don't have to be intimate, she knew then for sure that he was sick and dying, and that he had, the things she had heard about him contracting AIDS and HIV was actually true. And he, then, and to me, it was kind of like every time he got on his deathbed, then he wanted to recognize the value of her. And to me, it was just so real. Because it happens so much to women. There are women out there who feel that you love this man who does not treat you the way that you deserve to be treated, who is abusive to you, because she even talked about when they had a couple of fights, like fist fights, and things like that, and the fact that he had his own place, she had her own place, and they would stay together. But I just don't feel she ever fully trusted him, and I feel like that's why she never gave up his place or never made him give up her. She never gave up her place or made him give up his place, because I don't feel she ever fully trusted him. She knew how fickle he was, and so in that respect, I think that that part of her was smart. But I believe that she could have, had a relationship where somebody really loved her, but she really loved Mal Davis. And in this book, she talks about how she felt like her whole thing with him, when she looks back, is that she feels that um, she kind of saw in him what she felt she also saw in her father and mother's relationship, and kind of had that desire not to give up. And she saw this person who was hurting and needed to be loved and needed this void filled. And so she wanted to be the person to fill that void. And one thing I'm really glad about is that we are becoming better and better. And I'm not going to say perfect in this era of understanding that, a person who does not love themselves cannot cannot you can't teach them to. You can't teach them to. Now, you can be a support system, you can be a friend, you can be a, like, because we all need support, right? We all need encouragement. We all need, but a person has to want to experience a better version of themselves, if that makes sense. A person has to want to experience passion. A person has to want to experience what love is like. A person has to want to be better, if that makes sense to you. We cannot be the ones who in fact teach them or love them so much until they finally love themselves. And I feel that that is what she spent a lot of years trying to do. Like, if I continue loving him, eventually he will understand that he must, that what it's like to love himself. And I think that that was the toxic part of, one of the most toxic parts of this marriage. And it made me sad. It made me sad that Cicely wasted so many years um with this man, hoping that he would love her eventually, or love her the way that she deserved. Now, she says in the book that she does believe he loved her, but she said a quote, if you look at the bottom of the slide, that I think is so important. She said in this book, he had no idea what he meant to the world. And sorry for any typos, you guys. He had no idea what he meant to the world because he meant so little to himself. And she has that epiphany in the book. But for me, I kind of wish there was an epiphany that Cicely Tyson would have had years ago, and would have allowed herself not to be bogged down by this. But I think that that's also one of those defining parts of her life, right? Is that it's important for us to see Cicely Tyson as this powerhouse, this talented woman, this woman that we perceive to be strong, this woman that we look at as a pillar of knowledge, who was really amazing, but still very human. But still human. And this relationship with Miles shows us that. So I wanted to go back, and I think that one of the things that I think about with Cicely Tyson was, to me, love was just not the kindest to her, period, throughout her life, if you ask me. Because her marriage to Miles was not her first one, it was her second marriage. Her first marriage was to the guy that she got pregnant for when she was only a teenager. Um, Remember at the beginning of the story, she gets pregnant very early. She says after the first time that she experienced intercourse, and that she even didn't know what the enjoyable component of it was. You know, she didn't know, what the pleasure of it was, but found out she was pregnant, and then eventually married this boy, and really more so because she felt that she had an obligation to. And at the urging of her family, her mother was very strict. Her mother was very religious. She was a daddy's girl. Her father was very disappointed. Her dad was very hurt. So in her mind, she felt that, what I'm supposed to do is get married because I've had this child, and then this will be part of the way that I fix this whole thing. But excuse me, the entire marriage, especially at such a young age, I think one of the problems with that was just that number one, she didn't know what a man. She was a child. She got pregnant as a child. She didn't really, understand, a relationship because this was the first, type of relationship she had, and she just wasn't old enough to actually be in a marriage. Um, she doesn't speak terribly about the man she was married to, but just that she was not happy in a marriage, and she left. She packed up her stuff, she left, and that was it. And her mom actually gave her some pretty, despite the kind of tumultuous relationship she and her mother had, um, the hard times that they experienced, that was one of the things where her mother like understood. And I think her mother understood because of what she had gone through with Cicely's father, right? And she understood where that marriage was just too much pressure for you to bear. And so those are the two most talked about relationships. She does talk about, having other men that were interested in her, but as far as any relationship she takes seriously, we only know of two throughout her life. I think that Cicely was more committed to her craft than anything. I think that she was a very unique person. And so that understanding exactly where she wanted to be next in life and how she wanted to make that happen was one of the most important things to her. And so that's not to say that she didn't like relationships, but that because everything she did was so deeply impassioned, she was very deeply impassioned about relationships too. And when I talk about that relatability, like I get that, I understand that. I feel like I could completely relate to her as well. And if she couldn't be fully in love and involved with someone, then those relationships for her just weren't worth it. And I admired that about her. I think that that's what made her a noble woman. I feel that her background um, um, played a significant role in how Cicely lived her life, um, her spiritual upbringing, her cultural background, all of those things, I believe, affected how she lived the rest of her life. Does it mean that she didn't make mistakes? No, it didn't. By all means, it didn't. But it really shaped how she felt about relationships, interactions with people, even the type of role she took. Everything had to be done with dignity. Everything had to be done with honor. You see what I'm saying? That type of thing. Almost living in a, I don't know, there were times when I felt that she lived almost a rigid type of life. You know what I'm saying? It was almost like rigid. So I get that. I get that. And I believe that that was part of that Caribbean upbringing, that Caribbean lifestyle, that culture that she, because her parents were from Nevis, and then eventually they came to America, but still they had grown up with this type of very strict and structured background, and I think that that guided the way that Cicely lived her life, which is a little bit different. I know, despite the fact that we have gone through different experiences in America as Black people, I still believe that that affected how she lived was a little bit different because of where her parents came from. I hope that that makes sense whenever I explain it to you all. So let's go to the next one. The next thing that I thought was really important was Cicely and pivotal roles in Hollywood. And she had several really good movies. I'm going to tell y'all some things that I really, really enjoyed about her roles in Hollywood. I'm going to tell you straight up that two of them brought her right to Louisiana. And I felt that that was one reason that I needed to read this book as well. Like that was something I discovered as I read it, not prior to reading it. I have been a big fan of Ernest Gaines for a long time. Ever since I was a child and I first learned about A Lesson Before Dying, I've always liked Ernest Gaines. One of the reasons that I liked him was because he was a Black Louisiana writer who gained international acclaim. For me, I've talked about this before. I was like, you know, that we don't know of any black women in Louisiana doing that same thing, but we do have black men, and I would love to be among the black women who finally get this notoriety for being a part of the literary community and having this type of acclaim. So for me, when Cicely Tyson played in the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman, and then she was in the short series they had for A Lesson Before Dying, it was very important for me. And I believe Sounder was also shot in Louisiana. So a lot of her movie work was actually done right here in my state. And so they gave me a personal connection as well to understand that there's this space where black creatives have made this impact. And so we just have a responsibility to keep moving forward and to ensure that the voices and work of those black artists are elevated and remembered and honored and celebrated. And what Cicely Tyson did by coming to Louisiana to play those roles is exceptionally important. It is very, very important. The other part about it is the fact that, you know, Cicely Tyson tended to be seen frequently in certain types of roles. And so I asked myself, was she typecast or was she selective? And based on reading the book, she reiterates over and over again that she was more selective than anything. She actually talked about a role that she was offered in the 70s that would have made her like this black detective action star. But she also felt that the role tied into the black exploitation, the over sexualization of black women. And when they gave her the the um the script to look at, she completely rejected it. So y'all, believe it or not, I actually went online to go check out the role, and it was completely different from the types of roles that you would normally see Cicely Tyson play. So, in answer to that question, I don't believe that Cicely Tyson was typecast. I believe that she was just very selective about the roles that she was willing to take. And because she was very selective about the roles she was willing to take, a lot of times the ones that appealed to her most were historical in context. They were rooted in morality, and they had to be roles that she felt really spoke to the core of her beliefs and ancestry and the history and culture of this country, which goes right back to what I talked about with Dr. Maya Angelou whenever she said that she had asked or she had considered getting on board with actually doing movement work with the civil rights movement. And I made the statement earlier that all of us have some type of role that we are playing in social justice and social advocacy. The responsibility we have is to make sure that we're actively using our voice, right, in whatever role we are fulfilling, in whatever role we are playing. And I do feel that what Cicely Tyson did as an actress in Hollywood in those key roles like Sounder, Roots, the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman, A Lesson Before Dying, and other roles that she are a reflection of the cultural breakthroughs and strides she had to make in Hollywood. And she was a very vocal woman too. She would speak up instantly about what roles would not work for her and why they did not work for her and why she would not play those roles. And so I believe that that was also part of the adding to the dignification. I don't know if dignification is a word, but the dignification of Black women. In this book, she speaks several times about how Black women are treated, how Black women are over sexualized, how Black women were often treated like objects and things like that, and how she never wanted to be one that fell into that category. And one of those reasons being as well was because from a family standpoint and a moral standpoint, she did not want to be reflected upon as a woman who was used by Hollywood. And I believe that such is the case here. Um, she talked about the importance of roots, and I'm not going to get into that because y'all, we could do a whole conversation alone on what she talked about regarding the movie Roots and how Roots really opened up the conversation about people wanting to know more about their past, and making the decision to start digging into it, and how we are here in the era of like ancestry. I'm sorry, 23andMe and all those other things that allow you to connect the dots with your family, and how Roots was so instrumental in that. And the ironic part was that she would go on to play a significant role in Roots, and she wanted to find out some more about her family in Nevis, but sadly it came up at a dead end. She wasn't able to actually connect the dots on finding her family members herself, past her mother and what she knew about her grandparents. So that was a very interesting component of this as well. One of the things that she said about acting and being an artist was this: trauma may give rise to intense feelings, but to refine one's artistry, an actor must be taught to channel the unbridled rawness of that emotion. I thought that was important because every time Cicely Tyson talked about some of her most important roles that she did, especially the ones that she won awards for, she talked about all the processes she went through in order to try to adapt to these characters. And she did everything from researching to like contorting her body to, of course, the makeup component. She just went through so many things to really try to get herself psychologically connected with these characters, to really make sure that she embodied exactly who these characters were. So I thought that quote was a really important one that reflected what she felt it took for an actor or actress to really connect with the characters that they would play. So this was what I wanted to talk about as well, you guys, because I felt like this one was very important. Cicely Tyson and complicated mother-daughter relationships. And I felt like, and I told you guys I was going to try to keep this pretty short. Let me see where we are now. We're at about 10:54, so I'm going to try to wrap us up in about the next 15 minutes, right? I felt that Cicely Tyson's relationship with her daughter, I would not say that it channeled her relationship with her mother, but I felt it was an extension of her own relationship with her mother. I felt that Cicely became a mother very young. She was a teenager. And that once she discovered what her passion was, that motherhood kind of took a backseat to it because the relationship with her own mother was so difficult. And that she understood that she had a calling and a purpose. And I felt that she did not want to be so bogged down by a poor relationship with her daughter because of the relationship she had with her own mother. I may be wrong. I may not see that right. If she were here today, I wish I could ask her that question. Do you believe that subconsciously you struggled with being consistently engaged with who the name she calls her daughter is Joan, because of the relationship you have with your mother, and you felt like it would weigh too heavily on you to try to balance all those roles. As initially Cicely tries to get to elicits the help of her mother with her daughter, but her mother seems to be a bit overbearing and in a sense like almost like controlling when it came down to that aspect. And Cicely was not very pleased with how those things were going, so she decided to save up money to put her daughter in boarding school because she was working so much, and her career was changing. And so that was very hard. That was hard for her daughter. um I don't think it was hard for Cicely at first because she felt like it was just what she had to do. I think that in the latter years, especially as she writes in reflection, it is harder for her to consider or think about the fact that she sent her daughter off and missed all those years of time that she spent with her. But I will say this, I was very disappointed. I was very sad, very hurt. I was like, you know, I guess because motherhood is so important to me, right? That I was disappointed in Cicely, that she just kind of did not seem very interested in John for a long time. Um, and I wouldn't say interested, but it was like John always took the back seat. But I also thought about Dr. Maya Angelou. And if you've ever read her autobiography, and even if you listen to her son, the time he said he lived in his mom's shadows, these women who have these very big callings on their lives either learn how to balance it, or they have to make some sacrifices, and motherhood tends to be one. It makes me think about even Mary J. Blige when she said that she, wasn't interested in having kids because you always have to take care of somebody. And I didn't view that, or she said something of that nature. I didn't view that from a negative standpoint. As a woman who has an active career, who loves what she's doing, who's touching lives the way that she is, who's finally figuring this thing out for herself, um, would it be the question is not would I be willing to be a good parent? I don't think that's the question. The question is, would I ensure that I'm not missing those things for my child without guilt? I think those type of women go through that part. Because the fact of the matter is that, like, there are a lot of women, like when I had my son, as a very ambitious woman, right? I was like, wow, all of these things that I do in speaking and writing are going to completely change. All of this is going to go to the side. The minute they put him in my arms, I was like, oh, this is all done with. And I was very serious. I thought for a while I wouldn't be able to balance the two. I think the biggest difference is that we live in a different era now, and you have to have a unique perspective on it. Because Toni Morrison had two boys, right, and she raised those two sons, and was able to have a flourishing career. But definitely now we live in a different era where you can do things in a much different way. But I also believe that for some women, they just say the best thing to be able to do is manage this how I can. And I believe that Cicely did feel she did at that time what was best for her daughter. But on several occasions in the book, she makes reference to the fact that she hates that she neglected John. She should have done more with John. Several other references to the fact that she wishes she had done things differently or better for her daughter. I think, ironically, kids who have parents who grew up in the limelight tend to understand the challenge that can come with it, and sometimes that these purposes are much bigger than just that individual, um, and that those people are doing the best they can. The quote that I shared, Cicely Tyson says on her daughter Joan, and yet I realize now Joan needed far more than that from me. She longed as any child would to linger at my elbow. And she was talking about how she made sure that Joan had all this stuff and sent her off to school and did all these things. Now, in the latter years, from what I read, Joan did get the chance to come home and live with her sister and grow up with them. and they were able to spend more time together that way and grow. And that warmed my heart so much because I don't care what anybody says. I feel that as a woman, when your children grow up and you don't feel that you've had the time to spend with them or grow with them or nurture with them, you kind of feel a sense of ongoing regret that you don't know if you can ever recover from. And I feel that in that instance, when she is able to bring Joan home and, kind of raise her around her sister or allow her, her sister raise, has the biggest hand in raising her while Cicely is following her career, then that does kind of fill in that gap for Cicely Tyson. But even in this book, she says that she in a sense hopes that this book gives kind of like a reflective of how life was, why life was the way it was, and that it will be part of the story that Joan can have going forward. And even if Joan decides to tell the story from her own perspective. So I love that she finds a sense of peace, but she, acknowledges, these are the things I wish I had done differently, but that her daughter has always been important to her. And it can just be very complicated, especially during that era, because the time when Cicely Tyson was living, it was not. I mean, she talked about the fact that she had to lie about her age. She didn't even reveal her true age to us until what 15 years or so before she passed away. Then she finally revealed her true age to the public. People thought she was 10 years younger than she was. Women just had to go through a lot. They really had to go through a lot. And I think the other part was, as I said before, many years Cicely just struggled for her and her own mother to see eye to eye. And I think that the way that she and her mother struggled definitely, I don't care what people say, it will affect the way that you parent your own kid. Now, we can choose to make better decisions or to look at things from a different perspective or try to work them out differently. But in our conscious and subconscious, we are using the influence of our own parents to influence how we parent our own children. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know that for many years, Cicely struggled to prove, because even in her career, Cicely said her mother, when they were little, her mother didn't even believe in going to the movies. That's how against at Cicely's career she was. She didn't even believe in going to the movies. She thought that the movies were sinful. And so imagine when your daughter becomes an actress. She disapproved for many years until Cicely's career really started to take off. And then I think the part was to actually see the kind of roles that her daughter was playing. And I think that what really probably made her feel like it was sinful was probably a lot of what they had been exposed to or what people assumed, television was about in the era. But when she saw her own daughter playing these types of roles, as time goes on, that relationship between Cicely Tyson and her mother is able to improve. But I feel that Cicely spent her whole life always trying to prove to her mother not only that she was good enough, but that what she was doing was valuable and was important. And it's so, strange to me. Imagine being this Hollywood star, this famous woman, making all these movies that are changing the world, winning these awards, making this money, and then you're still struggling to prove to your parent that what you do is valuable, you know? And that was the hard part of it. So I thought the complicated mother daughter relationships played not only in regards to Cicely versus her mother, but actually also how Cicely was parenting. And then I talked about again how Cicely for society then became a mother figure. Because for us, for all of us, especially within the Black community, for us who grew up under Cicely Tyson, and saw her in movies like Sounder, The Autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman. Even if you saw her in the Trip to Bountiful or a Tyler Perry movie, we always thought of her as a motherly figure. We thought every role she played was a motherly figure, and we always got that aura from her. And I wonder sometimes if she emulated, because she in the book she also describes how she would capture a lot of these roles and even some of the people she crossed paths with to capture some of these roles. But I also wonder what bit of it also comes from her own mother, right? And then so while she may have felt that she dropped the ball in many places with Joan, while she may have struggled to prove herself to her own mother, for America, we always felt that Cicely Tyson was a motherly figure that we needed. I had put up on here page 46. I'm gonna flip right quick and see what I had highlighted on there about Cicely and her mother. Okay. So this was a passage I highlighted because once again, it was something that kind of reminded me of when I talked about Dr. Maya Angelou and something she said. Remember, I told you that Cicely Tyson's parents broke up at a young age because her father was having an affair with a woman in the church, and it was, her mother was very heartbroken by that breakup and felt like she faced a lot of hardship. But this was a passage I read. Um, in the days after my parents' clash, I'd often notice another of my mom's dispositions, the reflective one. She would sit in her rocking chair in the bedroom, shaking her head and repeating under her breath, "This life, this life." A canvas bag filled with peanuts was her sole companion during those times. Every weekend she'd buy a pound of them. She'd give Emily, Melrose, and me a handful, and then she'd take to her wooden chair, shelling those nuts one by one and peering out the window. I could feel her anguish. This is why I found it so bewildering when she occasionally chuckled. "Why are you laughing, Mom?" I asked. "Child," she whispered as she pulled another nut from the bag, "I am laughing at my own calamities." As Mom rocked back and forth, I now imagined she was tucking away her sorrows, regulating them or relegating them to the farthest corner of her heart. And I don't know if you all have ever heard, Maya Angelou has a poem where she talks about the woman on the bus that's laughing, but she notices that the woman is just curling up the corners of her lips. She's not actually laughing, and Maya Angelou calls that a survival apparatus. I will drop that video in the comments as well. But when I read this passage right here about her mother and the trauma she was going through, and I thought about how many black women along the way were on these nearly psychotic breaks when you were living in these types of situations. And I especially highlight black women because of the issues with race. The living circumstances for them and what they had to tolerate were often a lot different, a lot more intense as well. And it also took me back to that point that Dr. Maya Angelou had about the woman that's on the bus that just kind of goes, and Maya Angelou calls that a survival apparatus. And I will share that poem with you later. Um, but I think that you could do a whole discussion alone on the relationship that Cicely Tyson had with her mother. I think in the end, though, Cicely's mother was exceptionally proud of her, probably a lot more proud than Cicely knew. And she loved her mother regardless because she knew her mother was always the one who was there for her. Even though she was a daddy's girl at an early age, when things were left, it was just mom who was there. And I believe that that's why it was so important for her to feel that what she did was meaningful and important to her mother. All right, so we have Cicely and the legacy. So we're almost finished, you guys. Um, and I talked about that. So one of the things one of the accolades that she received is she's one of the very few stars to have an EGOT award. You guys, and I'm sorry, there are a couple of typos. When I say I spent literally a week making this, and I was working on this until this morning, so I did not get the chance to go back and double check on some of the things, but I will actually go through, update those things, and I'm going to drop the link to the PowerPoint in the comments on the YouTube channel. So you'll get to see it even with those updates made to it. But she's one of very few stars to actually have the EGOT, which is the Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony. And one of those awards she did receive later on in life as an honorary, which she deserved very much so. And I believe that was when she got her Oscar award later on in life. But she has a wealth of awards, and this is why I say that being selective about what you do pays off. Being particular about what you accept pays off. And sometimes it seems like especially in the era we live in now, it can seem like the easy road is just to accept what's trending or popular, but what's trending or popular can collapse. It can collapse at any moment, especially if it's not your purpose or calling. So once you know what the purpose of calling is, stick with that thing, even if the pathway. And I'm speaking to myself today, Lord, ministering to myself, right? Even if that pathway seems a little bit uh, uh, more rigorous to follow, it ends up being worth it. She receives all these accolades. She has a school that's named after her. She spoke all over the world. She really did receive honors. And what she could look back and say was that the portfolio of work she did was based on work that she valued and that she felt was important and that she was very proud of. And I think that's very important. Um, and what I found in this book, most importantly, was just a wealth of wisdom. She brings into light how so many of the ways that society has not changed. She talks about how much work there is to be done. She reflects upon the fights that she was fighting even when she was entering the scene. She talks about what things have changed. But she also talks about the importance of continuing to do their work going forward. And so one of the things I said is that she offers cultural. I said I didn't know gender was a word, but I made it up. Creative license, genderal, spiritual, and health wisdom for us to reflect upon and live by. You guys, even when she talked about basically what diet she's had all these years and how that diet helped her, I actually wrote those things down. I have the Cicely Tyson diet pinned somewhere on this wall, and I have started to make some changes in first my breakfast practice, and what's good for your stomach, what's good for your gut, and all those types of things. So she offers so many different types of wisdom that I feel we could use. I'm going to read to you just a passage that she put on page 397 that I thought was really impactful as well. Centuries of abuse have taught us to regard one another with disdain. She's talking about, the black community, and just how hard our journey in America has been, okay? Centuries of abuse have taught us to regard one another with disdain, to treat ourselves with the same contempt plantation owners once held for us. What else can explain why some of us still use the N word and whore when referring to each other? Why we partake in the narrative of homicide of ourselves in films, in music, in books, and culture? It pains me. It also makes me aware of just how acute our wound is. And make no mistake, my dear children, whether or not we recognize it, you and I were born into a legacy of trauma, and just as surely as we have inherited our foreparents' resilience. And when I read that, I cried because for those of you who follow me, you know that a large portion of the work that I do is about discovering just how many traumatic experiences we've had culturally, and how those traumatic experiences have played a generational role in shaping our emotions, feelings, practices, and behaviors today, and how we can go and make the changes that are needed in order to move forward in a more productive way every day. And there are often a lot of people who don't understand that. And honestly, there have been moments when it's made me question, you know, am I doing this the right way? Is the Black intellectualism worth the work I'm doing, the work research I'm pulling, the studying I'm doing? And in this book, from a woman that's almost 100 years old, She 100% confirms what I talk about in terms of trauma, and but how despite trauma we are resilient and being able to identify those things so that we are able to move forward. I absolutely broke down crying because it was self-confirmation for me to continue the work that I'm doing, the researching, the studying, the putting those pieces together, the working with the healing component, the loving component, the hand holding, the let's talk about these experiences of our people and get these stories to the forefront so that we can begin to see how it has really affected our people throughout history. And I thank her for that. And her wisdom is impeccable. So I wanted to suggest some of the benefits that you may experience from reading this book because there were certainly benefits that I experienced. Number one, it gave me a re-energized sense of commitment to my own artistic and cultural work, which sometimes you just get tired. We're human, we get drained, but I definitely felt re-energized. Number two, it provided an exploration of how slow progress has been regarding race and culture. There's work to be done, and there's work to be done quickly. Number three, it examined the necessity of Black workspaces while breaking glass ceilings in any workspace. And so on the last page, I just wanted to share with you some of my favorite quotes that I have saved and will be pinning to the wall to continue to go forward. The day we cease to explore is the day we begin to wilt. And at 90 some years old, I just think about even her movie, The Trip to Bountiful, right? How much she really wanted that role, and how I felt the whole premise of that movie was about exploration, revisiting, and still pushing herself. So, at worst, we were systematically locked out of home ownership and wealth creation, redlined into ghettos, and lynched. I thought that that was a very important line right there because she talked about just some of the traumas that Black people have been through and hardships we face. Black women, our essence, our emotional intricacies, and the indignities we carry in our bones are the most deeply misunderstood human beings in history. I absolutely agree. Intimidation is a prerequisite to growth as an artist because I'm always nervous about change, because I'm always saying, what if? That quote alone is going on my wall. Intimidation is a prerequisite to growth as an artist. Last one. And when the welling is done, I get up and I carry on, not in my own name, but in theirs. And by theirs, she means our ancestors. I felt that she did an absolutely fantastic job with this book. I believe that Just As I Am is a book that everybody should read. It is not a Black woman book. It's not a white woman book. It's not a male book, female book. It's a compelling story about American life, success, wisdom, knowledge, growth, transparency. And I hope that you all will pick it up if you haven't read it. Take the time to read it. So this is my what I call my lecture on Just As I Am. I hope that you guys liked it. Drop some comments in there. As I told you guys before, I was very rushed this morning. I did see a couple of typos. I'll be going in to update those and then dropping that Google link file into the comments for this presentation so that you can still see it. I mean, you can read it, it's just a couple of things, but that's how I am. So I will be dropping that so you guys can see that as well. But please share that. Feel free to share the video with others. If you missed it, you can go onto YouTube and follow the Black Intellectualism Movement. That's the name of my channel. Subscribe, please. And you can watch the complete replay there as well as other discussions we've had. Just a preview, on next week, I will discuss why it is important to preserve the authenticity of Juneteenth while being inclusive and diverse. And I can't wait to really push that conversation. I'm going to try to see if we can bring some other people on for it, but that's going to be a really good one. So, why it's important to preserve the authenticity of Juneteenth while being both inclusive and diverse. My son's channel is Cooking with Fam. On the 14th, we will be joined by Miss Fanyana, and they are going to cook up some soul food. They're so excited, y'all. She makes some really amazing hot water cornbread. I've been wanting some for a long time. She is going to teach my son how to make her famous hot water cornbread, as well as some other good Juneteenth foods, and talk about why Juneteenth is important and what are the things that she has coming up and what things he has coming up. So check us out on the 14th. I will be putting those flyers on my Instagram, Facebook, every other page. Um, the book that I'm reading right now is actually called The Half Has the Half Has Never Been Told. This is a very thick read. I'm doing a lot of research between a lot of documentary watching, but that's going to be the next one that I'll do the discussion for, and it probably will be split into 2 to 3 parts. I have started. I'm also participating in a group called White Women for Reparations. They are listening to this book on audiobook as well, so they're a little bit ahead of me. That's actually how I got introduced to it. That group is in Clubhouse and they meet on Tuesdays. So you can actually go in and listen to this book with White Women for Reparations, or you can order this copy. And I'm reading it right now. And honey, when I say I'm out, look, I'm already highlighting and taking notes, and I've been doing my research and everything else. So just like with just as I am by Cicely Tyson, I had a lot of note taking in there. It's going to be the same thing in here. So that will be the next lecture that I do for you guys. I have 3 lined up for this summer, and then in August we will resume the interviews for the Black intellectualism movement. I want to thank you guys so much for how supportive you've been of this. If it had not been for your encouragement, I'll be honest with you, I probably would not keep the Black intellectualism movement going, because it just your support is the encouragement that this work matters, this channel matters, these conversations matter. It's important that I continue to do the cultural work that I am. So if you have not subscribed to the Black intellectualism movement, if you're over here on Instagram, you can click the link in my bio and subscribe to my channel. Please encourage other people to do so as well. If you're streaming here live and you're on Facebook, you can go over to YouTube and subscribe to the Black intellectualism movement. We have a lot more important conversations coming about, and we will continue to talk about things that matter to the Black community but affect the entire world. I've had people say, well, why is it that you think a Black intellectualism movement is so important? Because there are still conversations that need to be had among us, about us, because we are people who impact, change, and affect the entire world. And because of that, we must understand our power and our potential. We must break ourselves free of the strongholds of trauma and truly be able to experience the happiness and joy we deserve, and have access to those resources that can continue to catapult our lives forward while honoring and remembering our history and our ancestors. I want to wish you a happy Juneteenth month. I will see you all on next week for the conversation called Why It's Important to Preserve the Authenticity of Juneteenth while still being inclusive and diverse. And then I will see you guys on Cooking with Fam, where my son will be doing a soul food meal to celebrate Juneteenth with Miss Fanyana. Thank you guys for joining me today, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of the week. Hey, Cassandra, thank you for tuning in. Bye.